Once you tell people that the DOJ is full of crooks, once you tell people there's a deep state, once you tell people there's lawfare or whatever, then people take you at their word and they will run with a conspiracy theory even after you've put it down.
The danger is that it grows on the other side, that it's a Trump cover-up, that Trump is covering up his own relationship. And of course, Elon Musk said what he said.
And it is laughable, quite frankly, to hear Trump sounding almost mainstream when he says there is no evidence to support the files and without evidence we can't go any further. Sorry? What? The man who had absolutely no evidence that the 2020 election was stolen suddenly needs to have factual evidence in order to take advice, to take his next step?
Make some noise if you care about the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
Raise your hand if it matters a lot to you. Raise your hand. So every hand of 7,000 people.
Everybody cares.
That's Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk, two of the luminous stars of MAGA land, talking about Jeffrey Epstein. That everyone cares, everyone is troubled by the lack of explanation, but one person is begging to disagree.
That person is Donald Trump. He thinks the question of Epstein and the so-called missing files is boring, and he wishes everyone would stop asking him about it. What is this doing to MAGAland? Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily. And in a moment, you're going to hear an interview with one of the new progressive Democrats, a man who is trying to unseat Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker. His name is Saikat Chakrabarti. He's worked with AOC. He's worked alongside Bernie Sanders. And he believes the old way of doing things is dead. And the Democratic Party has got to reinvent itself from scratch.
But we start with Epstein because this is a problem that is not going away. It is getting worse for Donald Trump. And surely if anyone knows about conspiracy theories, it is the current president. He has been the propagator of so many of them. And the one thing you should know is you cannot kill a conspiracy theory. You can shrink it, you can get people to look the other way, but just to tell people there's nothing to see here is not going to wash. And yet, that is still Donald Trump's demeanour when he's asked about it in public. This is him at the foot of Air Force One.
Why do you think your supporters in particular have been so interested in the Epstein story?
I don't understand
about how it's been handled.
I don't understand it. Why they would be so interested. He's dead for a long time. He was never a big factor in terms of life. I don't understand what the interest or what the fascination is. I really don't. And the credible information's been given. Don't forget, we went through years of the Mueller witch hunt and all of the different things, the Steele dossier, which was all fake. All that information was fake. But I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff. It's sordid, but it's boring. And I don't understand why it keeps going. I think, well, really only pretty bad people, including fake news, want to keep something like that going. But credible information, let them give it. Anything that's...
Yeah, and maybe the first thing you'd say is how deeply offensive that will be to hundreds of Epstein's victims, maybe even thousands, and all their families. When you hear the President of the United States saying it's pretty boring stuff, he's essentially dismissing a lot of the pain and a lot of the trauma and a lot of the crime that Epstein got up to because he's decided it's no longer worth considering. And I think that is partly why you hear those voices in the hall of Turning Point that we played you at the beginning say this is not good enough. You know, we actually do want to get to the bottom of whatever went on. You cannot just decide that this is over because you've decided that your conspiracy theory has gone. But I also think that it is creating real ruptures now within parts of the administration. You might have heard our episode last week and be aware that this came about because the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, shut down the case, having said previously that there was an Epstein file case on her desk ready to go. She then turned around and said, there actually isn't a file. There's nothing to see here. We don't know really what that file would be or whether there was anything or whether there is anything in existence that suggests a client list as such, but the fact that she shut it down so comprehensively with so little real explanation, and then this week gave a press conference where she refused to let reporters even ask about Epstein, suggests they are deeply uncomfortable with this issue.
This today is about fentanyl. This is about a wall of people right outside this room who have died from, I appreciate your question, but this today is about fentanyl overdoses throughout our country and people who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. That's the message that we're here to send today. Nothing about Epstein. I'm not going to talk about Epstein.
It's very hard to say you're holding a news conference, but we're not going to answer reporters' questions on the subject that you want to talk about.
I mean, fair enough. You know, fentanyl is a massive issue for America and a massive issue for many people in America right now. But it's not a great look as the Attorney General if you literally won't let people ask the question.
Yes, I mean, journalists are not the secretarial pool where, could you take dictation, Ms. Mateless? You know, they're not there to write down just what, you know, Pam Bondi wants you to write in your notebook. We are there to ask questions. And sometimes the subjects will be agreeable to her and sometimes they won't. But again, it's all kind of adding to this sense of why can't you just be candid about this stuff? And why don't you just tell us what is out there? You're the ones, after all, who've whipped this all up into the possibility that there was a conspiracy, that there was blackmail, that there was, you know, a murder, that there was all sorts of extortion going on. And now they're saying, no, actually, having said that for years, we now recognise there's nothing.
Yeah.
And the public aren't buying it.
And over the last 6 months, there has been a pattern of, I guess I'd broadly call it spinelessness. In other words, legislators, congressmen and women, senators, basically adhering to anything that Donald Trump says. Anything that he wants, any bill that he wants passed, they essentially come round to his way of thinking. On this issue, not so much. This is Tim Burchett. He is a congressman from Tennessee who is going out on a limb to say, no, I'm not having it.
I'm big on clarity and transparency, and you know, that's good reason people don't trust government, either party.
But you don't believe what the Justice Department is saying?
I don't know. No, I don't. I don't trust them.
Yeah, I mean, the cat's out the bag. Once you tell people that the DOJ is full of crooks, once you tell people there's a deep state, once you tell people there's lawfare or whatever, then people take you at their word and they will run with a conspiracy theory even after you've put it down.
And significantly, in the past 24 hours, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, kind of dutiful, loyal lapdog of the president, has come out and said, not good enough. We need to see the files, such as they are, lay it all out there and let the people decide. And, you know, it's kind of Donald Trump is being hoisted by one of his own conspiracy theories that he now wants to say doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? What happens when a conspiracy theory runs away from you? And I guess Mike Johnson, who has always been, as you say, the loyal Labrador, has now got to choose between the MAGA base that wants answers and the president who's saying nothing to see here. And the first thing I should say, I think, is it's pretty offensive language that Trump is using when he says it's pretty boring stuff. If you think of the hundreds, possibly thousands of Epstein's victims or those who know and support Epstein's victims, to just dismiss their case and their need to know what is going on as boring stuff is about as tone deaf as you could possibly be for a man who thinks that he is in touch with the pulse of America. But putting that to one side, Trump has got himself in this tangle where he keeps talking about the thing that he doesn't want to talk about because he keeps getting asked about it. And in fact, Pam Bondi, who you'll know is the Attorney General, who last week made that decision not to release the files, actually gave an interview. She gave a press conference in which she opened it by saying, I am not here to talk about Epstein. I mean, can you imagine an elected official, I mean, a senior member of the Trump administration opening up to a room of journalists by saying, I'm not going to talk about Epstein. So no matter how long you ask me and how long we stay here, I'm not going to talk about Epstein. There is nothing that will fuel the fans more than that. And it is laughable, quite frankly, to hear Trump sounding almost mainstream when he says there is no evidence to support the files and without evidence we can't go any further. Sorry? What? The man who had absolutely no evidence that the 2020 election was stolen suddenly needs to have factual evidence in order to take advice, to take his next step? I mean, it's very interesting that what he is doing by telling people that there's nothing to see here is making people absolutely fascinated by it.
Of course. And on the Democrat side, there is I wonder why Donald Trump doesn't want anything to come out about Jeffrey Epstein, because it was known that Trump knew Epstein. And I remember during when I was in Washington, that a briefing that Trump gave where he was asked about Ghislaine Maxwell, who's the only person who's been convicted of any of the wrongdoing that went on. Yeah. And he was very gracious about her. He was very nice woman, etc., etc. Yeah. And so, the danger is that it grows on the other side, that it's a Trump cover-up, that Trump is covering up his own relationship. And of course, Elon Musk said what he said. If I was to counsel Donald Trump, and I don't think he's going to pick up the phone and say, John, what do you think I should do? He should ring up Barack Obama, because Barack Obama had to deal with Trump's birtherism kind of conspiracy all the time that he was president, where Trump was saying, oh, Barack Obama was not born in the US, he was born in Kenya. And that went on, and it drove the Obama administration and the people around Obama crazy, because they couldn't shake off this bloody conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but it's too late for that, because as you'll hear, Trump has already lashed out as a way of preventing further questions about himself at James Comey, Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
Of course.
On what? On the
on the DOJ and FBI.
On what?
Review.
On what subject?
Epstein.
Okay.
On Epstein. Of the review of the files. Attorney General Pam Bondi.
A very quick briefing.
Did she tell you? What did she tell you about the review? And specifically, did she tell you at all that your name appeared in the file?
No. She's given us just a very quick briefing, and in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen. And I would say that, these files were made up by Comey, they were made up by Obama, they were made up by the Biden information, we went through years of that with the Russia hoax, with all of the different things that we had to go through. We've gone through years of it, but she's handled it very well.
Handled it very well. So Pam Bondi has given him a very short briefing on what's in the files. You'd think the president would be a little more curious, given the blowback that is coming over the fact that nothing has been released to the public and there's nothing to see here. I'm not sure how well Pam Bondi has handled it, or Donald Trump, because frankly, if they'd handled it better, it might not be the story it is now and is still growing. And you just sense that with some things, Donald Trump is brilliant. Look the other way. Look over there. There's a shiny object. And we all look the other way and we go scampering after it. No one is doing that. They are still persisting with questions, and the questions are intensifying.
Yeah, and it's creating what looks like the beginning of ruptures within some of the administration. And as you know, Trump is very good when there is an external enemy, whether it's Mexico, whether it's an alien invasion of illegal immigrants in his terms, whether it's the Democrats, whether it's Biden, whether it's a Russian hoax, that's fine. He's very good at creating a narrative of they're out to get us, the grievance culture, they're out to get us. This time it's all happening within not just his party, but his administration. Yeah. So the FBI director, Kash Patel, and his deputy, Dan Bongino, look as if they're at odds with the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. And at one stage last week, there were hints that Bongino might even
walk, yeah.
Yeah, give up his job. Give up a job as the second most important person at the FBI to what? Go back to doing a sort of right-wing conspiracy podcast. Not there's anything wrong with podcasts, obviously. But he didn't like what Pam Bondi said to the extent that he was thinking of walking. Now, that hasn't happened. We don't know if there will be resignations over this. I think it's probably unlikely. I'd also say, frankly, that Trump is the Houdini of politics, who manages to get himself out of extraordinary scrapes with incredible alacrity most of the time. So I'm sure that he will find a way of pulling the party back together. And if something happens in the next few days where we're all being made to look over here, you'll know why that is, right? There will be a look over here moment. But as things stand, as we record on Wednesday lunchtime, it feels very fractious what is going on within his actual administration between people he appointed, not always because they had the best track record of public office, but because they spouted his own conspiracy theories the loudest.
Exactly. And Kash Patel and Dan Bongino were at the forefront of promoting conspiracy theories about what happened to Jeffrey Epstein in that jail in New York. And so you have a remarkable situation where we have tried to chronicle over the past 6 months the sort of turbulence and the extraordinary pace of events in the Trump administration. And we've looked at the crisis over tariffs and what happens on the bond markets and the uncertainty over that, the bombing of Iran, the failure to bring peace to Ukraine, the continuing war in Gaza and the, not making progress there. Yet the biggest crisis that Donald Trump faces is over a bloke who died 6 years ago and what did or didn't happen over it. And this is because Donald Trump has been bitten on the backside by his own speciality, conspiracy theories, and inflaming them. And now he's trying to use a fire extinguisher, and it ain't working.
In a moment, we're going to hear from the man taking on the old-style Democratic Party, Saikat Chakrabarti, who's putting himself up against Nancy Pelosi. Well, joining us now on the News Agency USA is Saikat Chakrabarti, somebody who, to be honest, we have been following and listening to and watching for a few months now and trying to get on with the various time different logistics. And Saikat, it's great to be able to speak to you finally. Let's give our listeners a sort of potted history of sort of where you come into the picture, because you are taking on Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House in California, in her House seat at the next elections. You were Bernie Sanders', can we call you technology guru on the campaign in 2016, and chief of staff to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, unseating Joe Crowley, who was the person who was expected to win. So Saikat, I guess I'm going to say there is quite a lot of expectation on your shoulders now. Is that fair? Of being a representative voice of what the Democrat Party might look like or might need to look like and sound like in the next year. Does it radically need to change, do you think?
I do think it radically needs to change. I mean, that's the whole motivation for my campaign, because after Trump won in 2024, I was actually sort of hoping that the Democrats would have sort of this come to Jesus moment, where they do some soul searching, start to think about why they didn't just lose to Trump again, but, why they're starting to lose sort of their working class base, because a lot of the traditional Democratic base started to move, vote for Trump in this last election. And my view on it is ultimately, the current political and economic system in America just hasn't been working for most people for decades. I think for decades now, most people have been working more and more hours to be able to afford less and less stuff. And that's the fundamental thing driving people to vote for kind of sweeping change every chance they get. I think that was why Obama won in 2008, because he sort of campaigned on bold, sweeping change. I think that's why Trump won in 2016. I even think Biden campaigned on, a whole new economy with Build Back Better. And that was a large reason why he won. And so I think Democrats have really got to understand people are, they're open to the kind of change, but they're just sure that business as usual is not cutting it. And so Democrats have to win on that, and we have to deliver on that.
I was listening to Mark Cuban at the weekend, the businessman Democrat, who says the problem is that the Democratic Party tends to extrapolate and say this will happen if that happens. MAGA Republicans just say this is why your life is shit now. Do you agree that part of the problem is the way that Democrats approach the problems is through language, is through the way they communicate?
I think the language is downstream from a lack of a real plan or vision. I think on the MAGA side, they have kind of this cohesive story that they've really been saying for a while nationally of what their story is for why your life is getting harder. And they say your life is getting harder because immigrants are coming into a country and America spent a lot of time focused on them, focused on other countries, and not enough time focused on you. And, that's the whole premise of kind of this America First movement. And I think that Democrats, don't really have a story of why things are getting worse. And part of that, I think, stems from the fact that many Democrats don't actually believe that things are getting worse. I think, a lot of Democrats are living in DC, they're living in, top 1% of the population. For them, life isn't getting worse. And there's this whole debate in this last election of whether we actually even trust that what people are telling us when they say the economy is getting worse, inflation's too bad, we can't afford things, whether that's even real. Is that reality, or is that just some feeling that voters are having? So I think first here is like acknowledging that things are actually getting harder for a lot of people, and then actually coming up with both the story for how did we get here, but how do we get out of it, right? And MAGA's kind of got their, I'd say, ham-fisted solution that's not going to solve the problem. And, that's a benefit for the Democrats, because at the end of the day, life's not going to get better for a bunch of people after Trump's out of office, in 2024. So we have to then figure out what to answer. What's our answer to that going to be? And I'm really hoping the answer isn't just Trump was bad, and so, vote for us. I think the answer's got to be, here's our plan for how to actually make your lives better.
The thing that strikes me, watching the debate unfold, is that the Democratic Party establishment seems more frightened of you than they do of Donald Trump in some ways. The kind of the insurgent element of Bernie Sanders and AOC and now Zohra Mamdani and you is, oh my God, they're going to rip down the walls of the establishment.
Yeah, and unfortunately for them, I think unless the walls of the establishment get ripped down, the Democratic Party itself is not going to be able to win. I mean, you look at the polling right now, Donald Trump's, got low approval ratings. The Democratic Party's worse. People actually don't like the Democratic Party even more than they don't like Donald Trump. But, I've been in the game of trying to push back against the Democratic Party establishment for quite some time. And every single time, after AOC won, we wanted to try to work with the folks in the Democratic Party. We were trying to tell them, hey, let's come up with a real answer for how to solve these big economic problems. Let's try to modernize the Democratic Party. At that time, I remember, the Democratic Party wasn't doing anything on social media, didn't know how to use any of these new messaging tools. As we wanted to work with them. But the party has such a culture of just, keeping the status quo together, right? It's the seniority culture. It's this cautious culture. It's sort of this this defensive crouch that they've gone into. And in the face of MAGA, they're like deer caught in headlights, right? And they're, instead of coming out and actually trying to go on the attack, do something proactive, they're just trying to figure out how to keep this thing that they've got going together.
Okay, I can completely buy the argument about, they are old. And that's not to be ageist, but you look at, the age of Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. There's certainly Joe Biden when he was president, there was a feeling that it was a gerontocracy. It was an old people's retirement home, the Democratic Party. That's true on age. But in terms of their positioning, weren't they in the right place? Because America as a country is right of centre, probably the most European countries. And what you're offering is a much more European socialist sort of program.
I'd say what I'm offering, two things. So when you say America's right of center, if you ask people, do you think the Democrats are too far left or not far left enough? Of course, everyone believes they're a moderate. But then if you ask people on the actual issues, if you say, hey, do you think we should have universal health care, universal child care? Should the wealthy be taxed more? Should we be banning members of Congress from trading stocks? Should we be getting rid of big money in politics? Everything I said polls incredibly well, like not just barely above 50. It's usually above 60, 70, 80%. When we talk about the corruption issues, Republicans support it. Close to 90% of Republicans support stuff like that, right? So, and this larger question, there's this, very well-known pollster who asked a bunch of questions in the last election. If you ask people, do you think we've got to get back to stability, or do you think we need a shock to the system to change the current political and economic system? Overwhelmingly, people say shock to the system, right? So I think what people are looking for, I think there is broad-based agreement. The centrist position in America is that the current system is not working, and we need something that's not just little reforms and tweaks around the edges. We actually need to completely change our healthcare system, because no one believes that a few more reforms are suddenly going to get healthcare costs down, right? And that's just logical. I think that's just rational. People see what the way things are going. So I'd say Americans are pragmatists and we're realists. And the pragmatic solution right now is the stuff right now isn't working. Now, the thing I'm offering, I actually wouldn't describe it as socialism at all. I would say it's, yes, we need to expand the social safety net, provide basics for people. But beyond that, what I'm really talking about is investing in industry, building up jobs, creating wealth in the country again. Because if you look at sort of how every modern developed nation got to where we are today, it was often through these phases where we did massive amounts of investment in our economy to build up whole new economies, build up new industries. And I think that's what we got to do. We've got to get the country unstuck from the stagnation that we've been feeling for the last several decades.
But that was what Biden thought he was doing. I mean, that legislative program of the first couple of years promised to be exactly what you're talking about, didn't it? Re-energizing, green, protectionist, big employment. And I guess if you go back to Obama, like everyone has used the slogan change, including here. Keir Starmer, who's been in power for a year and came to power on the promise of change. And now, we're reading reports here saying that 90% of people in one survey think that politicians can't change anything. So I guess that's the question, isn't it? Is there something fundamental that's broken between leaders and their voters, leaders and democracies, where you either have to be part of a cult or else you have to be, or else you're kind of, you've slightly given up on the people in charge doing the changing?
No, I think so with Biden, with the Inflation Reduction Act, which was this big investment in sort of green technology, green manufacturing, which itself only really happened because the Green New Deal happened and it pushed Biden to respond and come back with Build Back Better. It was a step in the right direction, but I think what happened was he wasn't able to go all the way. I actually think it's a lot like Herbert Hoover, at the end of the Great Depression. Yeah. Herbert Hoover made a lot of steps. He created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. He started doing direct investment in the economy. It just wasn't big enough and it wasn't fast enough. And then you saw Franklin Delano Roosevelt come in and supercharge that stuff, right? And he actually made it big enough to make a real impact in people's lives. And that's what created Democratic majorities for decades, right? That created the entire New Deal political era in America. So yeah, I think what Biden did was decent, but he didn't do the institutional or structural reforms necessary to actually build the stuff fast enough. He didn't lead in a way that got the whole country excited about what he was doing. And so people didn't feel the impacts of what he was doing fast enough.
So you would say, if you come to power, you just need to massively increase the deficit and spend quickly and change people's lives quickly, because that's the only way that you will stay in power, because people won't otherwise feel a difference.
Change people's lives quickly, yes, but not massively expand the deficit, because the type of investment I'm talking about, if you look at when countries have done it, when countries have invested in productive industry, in America, when we did it, that was a money-making operation, right? When China invests in its EV industries and its solar panel industries, that makes money for China. That makes China richer, right? So that's actually a way to get out of our deficit. Like, I think the national debt is a real problem in America now. I didn't used to think it was, but I think now Trump's really made it a huge issue. And I think the way you fix the national debt ultimately is you've got to grow the economy and you've got to increase revenue, which does mean taxing the rich, right? So we've got to increase revenue and we've got to grow the economy. And the only way to grow the economy is you've got to invest in the economy. If you can't invest, you're not going to grow.
So it was so interesting at the last election, because if you looked at things objectively and what Kamala Harris was offering in terms of tax credits would help blue-collar working-class Americans, and yet they voted for the guy who sort of promised, it wasn't called it then, but the one big beautiful bill that was going to reintroduce big tax cuts for the wealthiest people, because there was an aspiration, I guess, among many people that maybe I want to be rich one day and I don't want to have large taxes. I just wonder whether going out and saying we need to tax the rich more is an election winner or an election loser.
I think there's a reason why when Trump talked about the big beautiful bill, he never once said, I'm going to cut taxes on the rich. He always said, I'm going to cut taxes on tips and I'm going to cut taxes on Social Security, right? And when I went out and talked to people and I talked to taxi drivers, that's what they heard. They heard Trump's going to cut my taxes. He's going to cut taxes on tips. He's going to cut taxes for working people. Because right now, cutting taxes for the rich is politically toxic. Everybody wants to tax the rich. Everybody realizes that the inequality in this country has gotten to a breaking point, right? Now, I'm not saying that just calling for taxing the rich is a winning political theory, because I don't think anyone believes that's going to fix the underlying economy. I'm saying we actually have to invest in the economy and grow the economy and give people real jobs and opportunity. But our inequality is a problem. And I believe it's actually a winning solution to talk about taxing the wealthiest. It polls incredibly well.
There are people looking at the Mamdani victory in the primary for New York mayor who say the trouble is he's kind of promising the world now. He's learned from the populist playbook where you just say things will happen and people will vote for things even if they don't get delivered. And I guess, you know, the thing we know about Trump, and maybe it goes back to Roy Cohn, you know, his advisor for so long, is if you keep saying things, even if they're not true, if you keep repeating them, even if they're not true, then that gives you electoral capital. Do you think populists on the left have to be willing to do that?
I think populists on the left do actually need to deliver, right? I do think we need to deliver. I think part of calling for aspirational stuff is that is the way to get something moderate, right? Like, I don't think we would have gotten the Inflation Reduction Act if we weren't calling for the Green New Deal. Because at the time that we called for a Green New Deal, Democrats were not even interested in any sort of investment in climate change. They were talking about reducing emissions by 80% by 2050 by doing a few small carbon taxes. That's the only conversation that we were having, right? In Mamdani's case, some of the stuff he's talking about, I think he can deliver, right? He can do the rent.
He's not really going to run shops. He's not going to run grocery shops in New York, right?
That's actually one of the few things he could deliver on if he really wanted to. I think I'm more worried about things like universal childcare, which will require a tax increase at the state level. I know this is getting a little local, but that's something that's going to be harder. But I believe at the end of the day, the theory of change, I'd say on the populist side, is the way you get political capital is by doing popular things, getting people on your side, and then using that to pressure other politicians to do more popular things, right? Which is very different from the establishment theory of change, is you have this fixed set of political capital you come in with, and every time you do something, it reduces. So you do as little as possible. So I actually think it's kind of smart for him to have picked a few things that he can deliver on, which include freezing the rent on rent-stabilized units and the public grocery stores, and then picking a few things that he can use the political capital to pressure someone like Kathy Hochul, who's a governor in New York, to raise taxes to be able to deliver on universal childcare. Because that's the thing actually that he's campaigning on that's the most popular. That's the thing that polls the best.
What do you feel about dethroning Pelosi? In the sense that she has been this extraordinary figure, kind of, some people say the best speaker of the House. She was the person who I think probably played a decisive role in persuading Biden it was time to leave the political stage. And here you are, and I'm sure people are saying, who is this upstart trying to dethrone one of our most revered figures in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I've got a lot of respect for Speaker Pelosi, and I do think she's done a lot of good over the last 40 years or so that she's been in office. But, I do think she came into office at a time when we had a Republican Party that still believed in elections, still believed in climate change, right? And I think she still believes that that Republican Party is there somewhere. They're going to come around any day now. And that's her skill, right? Her skill is doing sort of these bipartisan deals with a sane Republican Party, and I'd say largely keeping the caucus together. The problem is, I think we're in a place in American politics where that's completely changed. I think the Republican Party we have today is frankly completely nuts. But also, I think we're entering this era where we actually need new ideas for how to solve these real problems that people are having. And I don't think new ideas and a new movement and a new coalition, that's not going to come from Nancy Pelosi. She's really a keeper of the old guard and a keeper of the status quo, right? And I sort of saw this in practice when I was chief of staff for AOC. Whenever we were trying to push new things, things like the Green New Deal, her instinct was to try to tamp that down, right? And keep it from going anywhere. And I just think that's different. I think this is really critical right now because I do think we're at a point where we're going to define what the next 20, 30, 40 years of American politics could be, right? I think we had sort of the New Deal era from FDR to Reagan. We had the Reagan era from, his time to, I'd say, about the Great Recession. And since then, people keep saying, this era is not working. This is not delivering the benefits that we believe the American dream should be delivering. And they keep voting for change. And I don't want this new era to be the MAGA Trump era where, even Democrats are going to have to govern in that sort of frame. I believe we've got to pitch what the new era has got to be on the Democratic side. And I've been very clear that's not going to come from just me defeating Nancy Pelosi. I'm trying to recruit people to run all across the country. I think we need a whole new generation of leaders to completely redefine who the Democratic Party is and what they stand for and who they stand for.
Is mainstream politics dead?
Mainstream Democratic politics, I believe, is dead. I think the establishment and the current Democratic Party, they're trying to hold on, but I don't think they know where to go or who to stand for or what to stand for. And that's not going to cut it.
I've got a final question, I guess, for you, which is that there you are looking for your seat in San Francisco. You were AOC's chief of staff. She represented New York. You worked for Bernie Sanders, who was a bit further up the East Coast. You're very coastal. Do you speak to Middle America as well, or is this something for the East Coast and the West Coast?
Well, the fascinating thing about a lot of what I'm running on, which is reindustrializing the rest of the country, building up high-wage industries, that actually plays better in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin in the middle of the country. I grew up in Texas. I moved to San Francisco in 2009, and I've been living here for a long time. But I've spent a lot of my time talking to people in Texas. I lived in Tennessee for a long time, and I've spent a lot of time in, I'd say, the middle part of the country, right? And that's why I guess I'm running on the kinds of things I'm running on, because ultimately I just can't stand having a country where half the country is fighting another half of the country, right? That's kind of the politics we have. It's hugely polarized. And my sort of motivation this entire time has been, I want to make life better for everybody. I want to unify the country. And I kind of think you do need people who have a little bit of experience in both parts of the country to do that.
You've worked in tech. You've made your millions in tech. I don't know if you'd call yourself a tech bro, but I'm curious to know what your sense was when you saw the inauguration and you saw people that, I don't know, I'm guessing you've looked up to and you've respected and you've admired for their sort of work in the industry, all flanking Donald Trump. I mean, do you think that was just inevitable?
I think it was disgusting, and I think it's just craven cowardice from, I'd say, honestly, a handful of tech CEOs, because I don't think it's a tech industry at large. And I talk to tech workers every day in this campaign who are just embarrassed by it, right? And it's actually motivating a lot of tech workers to get involved in politics, to try to prove that those, few people that are standing up there with Donald Trump, they don't represent the vast majority of people working in tech who do want to do something good for their country. But yeah, I think it's awful, and I think it's just political opportunism from these folks trying to get something for their businesses or for their crypto holdings.
Saikat Chakrabarti, great to have you on. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
He's very persuasive, and I did go away after that interview sort of thinking quite long and hard about whether he was right, that, the Democratic Party as was dead and they've got to adopt a new way of doing things. And I guess he's from the progressive wing. He's seen the success of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and, actually to some extent Bernie Sanders, and said, this is the new way. I guess the other way of looking at it is, to put it back in the context of what happened in 2024, which was that Kamala Harris, who had only 107 days to try and win an election that, had Joe Biden at its helm, actually lost by the smallest percentage mark since Bush beat Gore in 2000. In other words, the popular vote, she lost by 1.5%. And there is a danger, I think, that the Democrats decide to tear everything up. They slag off Kamala Harris. They tell us that Biden's health was a cover-up. They talk about the fact that they're out of touch and they've lost the working class and they, can't ever recover from things again. Maybe that's true. Or maybe they are in danger of kind of doubling down on a mistake when actually the margin of their defeat was actually almost miraculous, given what they were putting forward.
I think the biggest mistake for the Democratic Party right now would be to think, all we need is one more heave. The pendulum will swing back. It's the nature of our politics. We don't have to do very much. There was nothing very much wrong. There was an awful lot that was wrong. And I think...
So you are saying tear everything up?
No, I'm not saying tear everything up. I think you've got to be cognizant of where public opinion is and how much the American people will accept and how you're going to frame the arguments, all those things. But I am now of the view, I've always thought that, where the establishment Democrats were was broadly the right place. The centre-right, which is where the Democratic Party has been, a free market party, but with, the backing of Wall Street and the backing of industry and all the rest of it.
You think that's still right, do you?
No, I had done. And I'm now thinking, and I'm now thinking that actually, the sort of, the charisma, the youth, the populist way of framing it, is going to appeal to more people. I think it's an uphill struggle.
Yeah.
But we've had the one more heave. Kamala Harris was continuity Joe Biden.
I agree. I think that the Democratic Party will never again mention Wall Street and will never actually want to sort of be in the room with Goldman Sachs in a very sort of visible way. But I think you put your finger on it when it actually probably, maybe it was always this, it just comes down to charisma. It's to do with somebody that you want to listen to versus somebody who, as Joe Biden said, I want to be in the background. Boy, was he in the background, right? You do not turn the sound up. And maybe he thought that that was a relief after 4 years of Trump, and maybe to many Americans it was. And don't forget that Biden's win in 2020 was... the turnout for the 2020 election was extraordinarily high. And his win over Trump was massive, was like 6.5%. So there is, to some degree, he was the answer to Trump then. And I don't think you can take that away. But I do think that we are, all of us as voters, just looking for who's the person you want to listen to.
But where I think that Chakrabarti is absolutely on the money is just saying, MAGA is not going to just go away.
Yeah.
You can't just wish it away and say, close my eyes, and in 3 years' time, when it's the 2028 election, it will all be gone.
But will anyone do it like Trump does? Will Vance do it like Trump does? I don't think so. Will Pete Hegseth do it like Trump does?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
Will Don Jr. come in? I don't think so.
But you've got to offer something that is going to get Democrats to vote again, because you have seen the declining numbers of the working class, the declining numbers of Hispanics. Yes, still a majority. But, they have started to lose support in key groups. And if you're going to win that back, you've got to have something to offer.
Yeah.
And maybe another 80-year-old is not the way to go. And we shall see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.